a new educational chess game. I have the white pieces, and I'm going to start with the pawn to e4. I'm playing against a player rated 1,642 points. He plays the pawn to e6, so it's the French defense. I'm going to play d4. And usually, when someone plays e6, it's to support the d5 push. There you go. And here, there are several variations. Either you take on d5, or you push, or you protect the pawn with a knight to c3. I'm going to decide to take on d5. This is the least ambitious variation, because black can simply recapture with the pawn and have an identical, equivalent pawn structure. So why am I doing this? I'm doing this because in this pawn structure, I have a plan that my opponents don't know very well. I'll explain it to you. I play the bishop to d3. That's the bishop's natural square. The opponent will probably play bishop to d6. No, he plays knight to f6. And now, my idea is not to play the knight to f3, but to play the queen to f3. I'll explain why, but not right away, because of bishop to g4. So first, I'll play h3 to prevent bishop to g4. Then, I'll bring out the queen to f3, the knight to e2, and maybe castle kingside. And after that, I'll explain why I put my queen on f3. So, the queen comes to f3, and it's not at all to attack the d5 pawn. It's very well defended. Kingside castle, I play the knight to e2, and I'm ready to castle kingside. So why did I put the queen on f3? Well, it's to counter the bishop on c8. Because of my opponent's pawn structure, he just played c6. By the way, it's the b7 pawn that protects c6, which in turn protects d5. And on my side, it'll probably be the b2 pawn protecting c3, which protects the d4 pawn. And his pawn chain is fixed on white squares, the same color as his light-squared bishop. That means his light-squared bishop has a hard time finding diagonals because of this pawn structure. And the presence of my queen on f3 prevents his bishop from going to f5. The bishop will only have d7 and e6, where in the end, it will actually get in the way of his pieces coordinating well. Whereas for me, my bishop is useful, even if I play c3. I can place it on f4 just as well as bring it to g5. So, the presence of my queen and my bishop on d3 prevent him from carrying out the plan with bishop to f5. He can't even play bishop to g4 because of the h3 pawn, whereas I can develop my bishop to either f4 or g5. For now, I'm not going to make a statement. I'm just going to do a little rock. Since I have both possible squares for my bishop, we'll see. So, I have a strategic advantage in being able to free my dark-squared bishop, while he'll have trouble activating his. He just played knight to d7. I play the pawn to c3. For now, I'm not making any decisions. Rook to e8. He puts the rook on the file and frees up the f8 square for the knight. I'll probably play bishop to f4, with the d2 square for my knight and the rooks connected so they can contest the file. So, the position is symmetrical. The only difference is my dark-squared bishop versus his light-squared bishop. And you see, he still has no way to activate it except by putting it on d7 or e6. So, I play knight to d2. If he plays knight to g6, I can play bishop to g5 or retreat my bishop to h2 or g3, for example. On the file, for now, I'm keeping a close eye on the e4 square so he can't get in there. I have triple control over the e4 square. I'll need to put the rooks on the file, move the knight, and sometimes play g3. We'll see what happens next. Let's watch what he plays anyway. He plays crazy d6. I can agree to exchange the dark-squared bishops since his pawn structure is on white squares, so his dark-square bishop is his best bishop. Or I can play bishop to g5 to pin. Actually, I'll play bishop to g5, and if he plays h6, I'll take, because if he recaptures with the queen, I take back, and he'll be forced to recapture with the pawn, which ruins his pawn structure. So, bishop to g5. Either he goes back to e7, or he plays knight to d7, but each time, he's retreating or blocking his own pieces. The knight on d7 gets in the bishop's way, and the bishop on e7 blocks the rook, you see. So, I go back to g5. I have this pressure here on the knight on f6, which is pinned. It's pressure I can sometimes increase with moves like knight to g3 or knight to h5, to keep putting pressure where it hurts. And the two rooks, which are connected, will come to the open e-file. Now, this plan I'm showing with queen to f3 is a plan I saw played by the Bulgarian grandmaster Todor Todorov. Todor is his first name, and Todorov is his last name. But this plan hides strategic intentions that the opponent might not see coming and could end up in trouble afterward. You see, by simply playing and developing my pieces, I'm playing against the bishop on c8. My goal is to make it difficult for that piece to get into the game and, in the end, just keep playing the position normally. So, This is a 10-minute game with 10 seconds added per move. That means there's a lot of extra time added. That's why my opponent is thinking, and I'll speed up the sequence in editing to take you straight to the move that was played. There we go. He just moved his knight back to d7. So now he's probably going to want to play h6. I'm looking at bishop to f5, h6, bishop takes knight on d7, with the idea that if he takes the queen's bishop, he will have a problem at f6. And after bishop to f5, h6, bishop takes on d7. He'll probably take my bishop on g5. And in the end, this position isn't great for me, so bishop to f5 isn't that good. I'll probably play knight to g3 then. But after h6, I'm a bit stuck because if I retreat to h4, I'm going to get crushed by the g5 push. And after knight to g3, h6, I can go to f4 instead and offer to exchange for his bishop. That's possible. So I'll play knight to g3. Now that lets me put my rooks on the open file. And the knight on g3 can threaten to jump to f5 or h5, so he can't allow that. There's still the knight on d2 that needs to be improved. For now, it's watching over the e4 square, but it's true that this knight should be able to be improved. After rook to e1, sometimes you can play knight to f1, then bring it to h3 to f5, or go to h2 to come back to g4. There are ways to reposition the knight. So h6 asks the question to the fool. If I retreat to h4, I get hit with g5. It might not be completely losing, actually, because I have knight to f5, counterattacking his bishop and his pawn on h6. So after bishop to h4, g5, knight to f5, he can come to f8 to defend h6, but then my bishop can go to g3. That's not bad because I'm going to force his pawns to advance and weaken his position a bit. Or I could simply play bishop to f4, bishop takes, queen takes. So here I'm hesitating, but I have time, so I'm going to calculate carefully. Bishop to f4 is actually very good. It's the plan I had in mind. Trade the dark-squared bishops, leave him with a bad bishop, use the file with both rooks, and eventually take control of that file. But I'm also interested in the idea of bishop to h4. Try to provoke him into playing g5. He'll think he's winning my piece because my bishop is trapped, but then there's the counterattack with knight to f5, which is interesting. But after bishop to h4, he could also just play queen to c7. And this time, he would really be threatening to come in on g5. So no, let's just calmly play bishop to f4 then. And you see, I'm going to take control of the e-file with both rooks. My knights have more attacking prospects than his, especially with that move into f5, and my bishop is better than his. He plays to f8. Maybe he's looking to come back to e6 or g6. Let's play rook to e1. This rook and not the other, because I want to keep the f1 square open. That can be a square for my pieces, sometimes to reposition them. So here, the knight has the f3 square, but sometimes it can go to f1 to bounce back and get back into the game on e3, or to h2 to return to g4 or f5, you see. So the white advantage is still pretty minimal here. I don't have a very big advantage. It's just that I have a slightly freer position with a bishop that's a bit better than his. So he plays bishop e6. Maybe to double the rooks on the file. Yeah, I'm going to play rook to e2. I'm just going to double the rooks on the file. After that, he can move his queen and then pull back the bishop, and the rooks will get exchanged, you know. But my advantage doesn't lie in having the rooks. Because, okay, I'll have my rooks on the file before he does, but he'll be able to trade them off. My real advantage is that light-squared bishop. You see, even with queen d7, you won't be able to play bishop f5. You won't be able to play bishop g4. So, rook to e1. And now, maybe use the e5 square. Knight to f3. Knight to e5. He plays rook to e7. So now his bishop is pinned. If I play knight to f5, he can't take it. Otherwise, he loses the rook on e7, right? So knight to f5, he'll be forced to go back to e8. And now, I've got some interesting options. I can play knight takes h6 check, pawn takes, and then capture his knight on f6. So knight to f5, rook to e8, knight takes h6, pawn takes, queen takes. I win a pawn and seriously weaken his king's side. That I like. But after knight to f5, I'll still check what happens if bishop takes. So rook takes, I attack his queen. He could come and take my bishop. I take his queen. He takes back, because I don't want to leave him with too many pieces for the queen, you see? But anyway, knight to f5 should be fine. If I play to g6, I can take his rook with check and then either save my queen or even take his knight, for that matter. On knight to g6, I also have knight takes h6 with check, and if the pawn takes, I capture the knight as planned, right? So, the rook goes back to e8. Knight takes h6 with check. If he doesn't take, I'll pull my knight back or do something else. And if he does take, I capture the knight. After that, you need to bring the rook to the third rank to attack the king. Let's see if there's not a more direct way, because I still have the light-squared bishop aiming in that direction, you know. But I think the win will come from bringing the rook to the third rank. He might not take and instead go to h8. No, he took. All right, I take the knight. I'm up a pawn, and his king has no shelter left. I'm also threatening to take the pawn on h6, and he can't even defend it because the bishop controls the h7 square. He can play h5, but then there will be queen to g5 check, and I'll take the pawn on h5 no matter what. But the fastest way will be to bring the rook over to the third rank. Because even if he can play knight to g6, there will be bishop takes, pawn takes, then rook takes with check. You can see that the queen on f3 is putting pressure on black's position without being destabilized, because since we played h3, there was no bishop to g4 to attack it. So, at the same time, it muzzles the opponent's bishop, but in addition, the queen puts pressure on the king's side. If you don't have a specific line against the French defense, here's a variation that could be interesting for white. The understanding is pretty straightforward. There aren't any complicated calculations. It's just about strategic understanding. We fight against the light-squared bishop by creating pressure and making it difficult for the opponent to complete their development. He plays knight to g6, but obviously, that's not going to save him because I can take his knight, and after he recaptures with the pawn, it's the bishop that pays the price. In the end, his bishop is going to end up getting taken. By the way, should I take his bishop right away? Maybe it's better to take the pawn on g6 with check first, and even if he brings his queen over, I can trade queens and then take the bishop. So I'll start by capturing on g6. If he goes to h8 or f8, I'll take the pawn on h6 with check again. And only at the end of the sequence will I take the bishop. That way, I'll clear out his pawns, and I'll have the 3 pawns here. So he puts his queen on g7. I have to take the queen on g7 first, and then take that bishop. Honestly, it almost pains me to take that bishop. After playing against its activity, I would have liked to leave it on the board a bit longer, but now, well, it has to go. So the game loses some interest for the stronger players, of course. At least they might have discovered an interesting plan. And for the less experienced players, we'll see how to quickly finish off the win. So the king comes to f7. Now, it's just a matter of exchanging pieces. We exchange pieces to simplify. Then we have 3 pawns against 1. So we play f4, g4, f5, h4, g5, and we'll advance with the 2 passed pawns. And if the king tries to block, we'll have the king and the knight to break through. So we're sure to be able to promote to a new queen. And there you go, my opponent resigns now. Let's analyze anyway to see what my opponent could have done. So e4, e6, d4, d5. So I exchange on d5, bishop to d3. Then my opponent plays knight to f6. And here I don't play queen to f3 right away because I don't want it to be attacked by bishop to g4. So I first play the pawn to h3. He plays bishop to e7. The queen comes out to f3, kingside castle. The knight to e2. He plays c6, kingside castle. And you see, I have this position where the bishop on c8 can't get out. While I can play bishop to f4 or bishop to g5, knight to d2, c3, and put the rooks on the e-file. I can complete my development more easily than my opponent. So he plays knight to d7. I play the pawn to c3. He plays rook to e8. So far he's not making any mistakes. f4, f4. It's just that the position is a bit trickier to play. Knight to f8, knight to d2. He puts the bishop on d6. He offers to exchange the dark squared bishops. In the end, I refuse. I play bishop to g5. He goes back to d7 to protect his pin knight. I play knight to g3. I want to go on the attack, especially with knight to h5. He plays h6. He attacks my bishop. And here I thought for a long time between bishop to f4 and bishop to h4. The computer says both moves are about equal. At first, I wanted to play bishop to h4 because I thought on g5 my bishop wouldn't get shut down. I have the counterattack with knight to f5, so he can go to f8 to save his bishop and protect the h6 pawn. But then I can play bishop to g3, and in the end, I provoke the advance of the h and g pawns. My knight is established on f5, and his pawn structure on the king side has been weakened. My rooks will be able to use the e-file. The d6 square is interesting for me. If my knight on f5 is no longer there, maybe the queen can take advantage of the f5 square. This position is actually very interesting. But I wanted to play more simply, so I played bishop to f4, then bishop takes f4, queen takes f4. He played knight to f8, and I brought the rook to e1. He plays the bishop to e6. He doesn't really know what to do with that bishop. That's the goal for white, you know. Rook to e2, queen. b7. Now I play rook to e1. You can see that the advantage bar on the right shows a slight edge for white. And here, he plays rook to e7. And that's his fatal mistake, because it allows knight to f5, taking advantage of the pin on the bishop along the e-file. And then following up with knight takes h6, pawn takes, and queen takes. So that's where he loses the game. Up until now, he was in trouble, but he hadn't lost any material. So what could he have played instead? He could have played, for example, rook to d8 and waited a bit. Personally, I think I would have improved the knight on d2, which wasn't doing much, by bringing it to f3 and then to e5. Try to build up forces and pressure like that in the opponent's camp. It's an advantage for white, but it's not a decisive advantage yet. But it's really with this move, rook to e7, that things fall apart in the game, because after knight to f5, now there's no longer any difference. So he retreats to e8, but then knight takes h6, and even if he plays king to h8, it's very tough for him because he's lost a very important pawn in this position. On top of that, he still can't capture the knight because there will be captures of his own knight with check. But I can also bring my knight back to f5 and accept any endgame now with an extra pawn. Those will be winning or very advantageous endgames for white. He took on h6, so queen takes f6, and now there's no way out. He plays knight to g6, but we can capture the knight, then win the bishop, and now it's not just an extra pawn we have, it's an extra piece, so it's completely over for black. So this is really where things fell apart after rook to e7. The computer recommends rook to d8 in this position, knight to f3 with a white advantage. There you go. I hope this video was informative, entertaining, and that we'll see each other soon for new adventures on the chessboard. Goodbye, everyone.